Hey, everybody, welcome back to Inside the Force. But this is Council Sessions. Back at it. I'm David Cottingham with Cody Geiler. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. It's a little cold here where I am, but nice and warm and toasty inside and ready to talk some Star Wars.
That's right. Actually, I think it's safe to say that like the entire country is cold. Texas is cold.
Yeah, I think it's right. There's a lot of places where I think somebody put up a graphic that like 70% of the U.S. had snow at one point this week or something. It's kind of crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. We are in Kentucky. We're used to snow, so but this is more than we've gotten in a long time. Mm-hmm. All right, so thank you for joining us here on Council Sessions. What we like to do on this segment of our channel here is we answer the big burning questions that are lingering in the galaxy right now. And one that I have for us right now centers around the three main characters that we grew up loving about Star Wars: Han, Luke, and Leia. And the question that we want to dive into in this episode is, with all these stories that are happening now with Lucasfilm, especially this new era that just got introduced, the High Republic, right? 200 years before the prequel trilogy, you've got all these Disney Plus series that got announced during Investors Day a couple months ago, with Ahsoka coming, and Rangers of the New Republic, and The Acolyte, and Andor and Obi-Wan, all these character-driven series, right? Then you got Taika with his movie, and Patty Jenkins. You got all these different stories that seemingly, right, have nothing to do with our original trilogy characters. So the question that I want to pose out there, Cody, is kind of a two-parter. One, is Lucasfilm done telling those stories of those characters? And are you ready for those stories to be done and to move on?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. These are the hard-hitting questions. I'll start with the Lucasfilm side, because I feel like I just have more thoughts based on where we've left off with certain content. So the big one being, you got to talk about Luke's appearance in The Mandalorian Season 2, right? Mm-hmm. We all kind of were speculating, kind of wanted it. I was caught off guard. A lot of us were caught off guard by it, didn't think it was going to happen. And then they also used Mark Hamill. They didn't recast. So I think that's kind of big. Now, I mean, it was sort of like a CGI thing. It wasn't like actually him there necessarily the whole time. But that seems kind of telling. Probably the biggest character for a lot of people, Grogu.
Yeah.
Who I've got back here with me. He's with Luke now. So it's like if we want to find out where those stories are going to go, at some point you would think that Luke's going to have to come back. Mm-hmm. Now, the trio altogether, I don't think Lucasfilm is going to be able to do much with that. But what I will say is, on the Disney Plus side, you mentioned a lot of the series coming up, and a few of those series did have some characters that we already know, right? We got the Book of Boba Fett, we've got Obi-Wan. Mm-hmm. They're going back to the well of characters that we've utilized and seen in Star Wars, and we have new characters. I think the movies are most likely done with that. I think it's going to be really hard, obviously, to get Mark Hamill back. Harrison Ford, we know what happened with Han Solo in Force Awakens. But I think Disney Plus has an opportunity in animated form, and I don't know if those would be the same actors playing, doing the voice acting. Mark Hamill's done a lot of that, so it seems like we've talked about the potential of maybe having an animated show with Luke, building his Jedi Academy. I think that would be super interesting. I would definitely watch it. But I think with The Mandalorian leaving that door open, I think we're going to end up seeing at least Luke again in some form on Disney Plus. Mm-hmm. And then I also would really, now speaking for what I would want, is I would really want to see some of the in between 6 and 7 more fleshed out. And if it's animated, I'd be totally fine with it. And I'd love to see what Han was doing in some of that racing circuit, as well as going back to his old ways of smuggling. And you get to see Leia either starting to train with Luke or coming into her own with the New Republic / Resistance. So I would like to see animated form, like just speaking for what I would want. Like I want more there's still a little bit of that chunk of timeline that I think is untold.
Yes. Yes. Okay, well, that I had my own thoughts too, but of course, you raise a lot of good points and even more questions. I think on Lucasfilm side, I'm definitely with you on the side that we won't see him in live action at all. I don't think, especially with the passing of Carrie Fisher. But it's hard for me to think that I'm probably on the fence, on the side of the fence right now that that will be the only look at Luke in The Mandalorian. I don't think they're going to right now. I don't think they're going to go back to that. I think it's the Mandalorian's show now, really truly his show now, and I think he's got more to do in that with the Mandalorian. So I do think that story will continue somewhere else, and I probably think it might be a comic or a book form. And so Lucasfilm, as far as I think on screen, be it Disney Plus TV, I do think that they're trying to move away from those characters. I do think they're going to still live on in the comics and possibly some novels here and there. There is still a Star Wars ongoing series right now in comics that's filling the gap between 5 and 6. Will that continue? Because they did a good job of filling in 4 to 5, and now they're doing 5 and 6. So will they continue that comic series through, like you said, 6 and 7, and start filling that gap? Because that would I definitely think that that's a possibility. So, but then it comes down to what do I want? And I don't know. I think for me, my generation, if you say the one that grew up in the 80s with Star Wars, I definitely want those stories still. I mean, I'm actually a big fan of Solo. I'm a big fan of the movie Solo and seeing that origin, because to me that wasn't just about Han. It was about Lando. It was about Chewbacca. It was about that brotherhood that those guys created. And we've talked about it 100 times on our show about that being a great Disney Plus series, actually, right? With Glover, awesome. With Alden and Glover. So I don't mind. I don't mind seeing those. I think that it comes down to me is I've always had a problem with recasting, right? And I because there's all these rumors about whether or not Sebastian Stan would get cast as a Luke live action Luke series. I'm more okay with it now than I used to be, because part of me wants those characters to live forever, and obviously I know that with age people cannot live forever, right? And unfortunately, Carrie is an example of that, But I, like her daughter, would I be okay with her daughter playing Leia? I probably would be. You know what I mean? So I think it would take some getting used to. But then again, it's like we talk about generations, right? And even a generation younger than you are, they're not as familiar with these characters as we are, right? So seeing new likenesses of them probably wouldn't bother them as much, right? So that's who I think you've got to focus more towards. My generation is not on the way out, but we're older. We're kind of looking for more stories and more High Republic stuff, or other games that are beyond the sagas and stuff like that, or whatever. So I guess part of me is I think Lucasfilm could keep them around more so in the publication side of things, but part of me wants them to do as much as they want to, as long as the stories are there, and don't be too afraid to recast.
I think the recasting point you made is really interesting because, we're looking at Obi-Wan series coming out, and there's been rumors that they might cast a younger Luke. And a lot of people have talked about like how they'd love to see, not necessarily in the Obi-Wan series, but in other series form, like a young Leia. You mentioned Carrie Fisher's daughter. A lot of people have thrown out like Millie Bobby Brown's name. So there are some of these interesting young actors that I think you're mentioning that kids are already growing up seeing in things like Stranger Things and other shows, that you could almost fill in some of these gaps or do prequels like they did with Solo, or different, iterations that we've seen, where you could do a younger cast, what they were doing before we saw them in A New Hope. I feel like if there is the right story for those characters, then yeah, I'm on board. I don't necessarily just need them back because I think Star Wars has shown in different forms it can stand on its feet without them. A lot of different Rogue One, for example, even though they use Vader a lot, but Mandalorian, aside from the end of season 2, a lot of the screen time has been other characters. So I think it's proven that you can. And one thing that I guess we didn't mention is I would love to see, and somewhat untapped in the recent canon, is the video game side with those characters. We saw them a lot in the Battlefront 1, specifically the Battlefront 2 campaign. Had Luke as a playable character and had Han and, all the original trilogy characters. But they could tell some of these stories that are more filling in the gaps like they do in the comics in game form. So 100%. I would also be all about that. And I think it would be a lower impact on, you don't necessarily have to recast. I mean, you could recast a voice actor, and they've already done it in Battlefront, and people seem to be really receptive of that.
That's a very good point. I think, and I think and maybe this was George's intent back when he started the prequels, when he created that massive gap between 3 and 4, right? There was 19 years there. And of course, the Disney version of the trilogy, the sequel trilogy, they created a 30-year gap. Part of me wonders if that was intentional to fill in those gaps with other stories, or were you obviously the Skywalker Saga, the reason for the gaps and really what happens in a sense, but there's so much story there, and we know that these characters survive. We know that these characters are definitely around before 7, but even like you said, before Episode 4, like Luke and Leia are growing up. And Han he's already kind of grown up, and he's living his life as a smuggler, is trying to make his way in the galaxy. So I think there's plenty there. I think even with what feel like we're gonna discover with Obi-Wan, that there's gonna be a lot that happens on Tatooine. Protecting Luke and keeping him a secret. And then Leia, of course, if you've read any of her books, the Leia book from Claudia Gray, when she was 16, she went through a lot just to be, move into that political life. And she's been living that political life, growing up with that her entire life. So it's like, there's definitely story there. I think there's plenty to do there. And I agree with you. I think having these actors that are young and in the spotlight right now that this generation of fans are familiar with, I think that would lend itself to really give Lucasfilm the ability to still prolong those characters if they decide to. Now, that's the question: is it worth doing that? Unfortunately, have most fans looked past that, and are they more worried about Ben Solo now and Rey and Finn and Poe, and then possibly with the Mandalorian and Grogu and Ahsoka, and are these characters becoming more popular than possibly the original? Now that's a whole nother council session, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. I think the interesting question there is, like, if Lucasfilm were to say, okay, great, we're going to tell more stories, and they almost had to like pinpoint a timeline, I think it's interesting to wonder, would they choose to continue the trio between 6 and 7, or would they want to go back like we were talking about? And let's say this is like a live action form, or maybe even a Disney Plus form. They've got Alden from Solo, and there's a lot of people that want continued Solo stories in Solo 2, and the Make Solo 2 Happen movement has got a lot of traction, a lot of fans. So I wonder if they would would rather go back, and you could almost do 3 different genres. You've got like a solo Disney Plus series, which is like this sort of like, scoundrel shoot 'em up sort of thing, action adventure. You could do a coming of age story with a young Luke, and then you could do like a political. You were talking about, Leia and the Leia books that have been released. You could do some kind of like political drama with a young Leia learning how to, play the game or be involved in politics. So I think that would be honestly like an interesting way to continue those characters.
Yeah.
I just don't know if they would actually want to commit to 3 different series,
Right. I know. But that is a great idea. I would, especially if you could play it to where it literally leads into possibly episode 4, how they get together, right? You see whatever paths they took, Han getting to the cantina, Luke, meeting Ben, and then of course, which we saw in the movie, but prior, what was he doing right before? Leia, of course, how did she, we still don't really know how she ended up in the Battle of Scarif, right? I mean, she's there. I mean, obviously she was probably on her way to Tatooine for some reason, but there's circumstances before that we don't know. So good stuff. Great thought about those characters. I think I think we're both, speaking for you too, I think we're obviously huge fans of those characters, and it's the reason why I think we all fell in love with Star Wars in the first place. So at some point, I don't know when, that's the thing. At some point, I feel like we probably have to say goodbye to those characters at some point, that those chapters will end up being closed. It's just a matter of when. And unfortunately, I do think it's going to happen in the near future, in a sense, as things are opening up a little bit in Star Wars, So, any last thoughts on that, Cody?
I mean, I think you kind of hit it there at the end. I think we will definitely have to say goodbye in a sense too, even though we already kind of got like good send-offs in the sequel trilogy 7, 8, 9 to each of them in their own respects. Obviously, Carrie Fisher won't be able to, she's not around, so right. I don't think they'll ever recast Leia in that timeline. I don't think we'll see Mark Hamill in live action again outside of like a deep fake style CGI thing. And I highly doubt Harrison Ford's coming back. So I think in a way we've kind of already said goodbye to the actors that play them,
correct.
at least like in that sequel era.
Agreed. But at some point, will there be a, I don't know, it's like, will there be a telling of the fans that there are going to be no more stories with these characters? We kind of, if you remember, we kind of got told that the Skywalker Saga, once this sequel trilogy is over, like this, we're not getting any more Skywalker characters. Like those characters from those movies aren't going to appear in anything else anymore. And obviously in the novels and stuff like that they're still in the comics, they're still lingering around in there, but I think there will be a time, again, and we can talk about that when it happens, but I think there will be a time when those characters are retired in a sense, and there's going to be a whole new slew of Star Wars stories that we're expanding on. And that's where I think this New Republic or High Republic era is that test of, can we move away from that era and start telling stories over here and kind of close out that part of the saga. So it's a matter of opinion, but I think that's what they're trying to do. So, all right, everybody, that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. Come back for more right here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Inside the Force. Give us a follow. And subscribe. Of course, you can follow us on our podcast feeds. You can get this episode along with Beyond the Saga and our main story, or our main content, Inside the Force, which is weekly. So check that out. Thank you, Cody, for hanging out with me on this one.
Yeah, of course. Love it. Hope we get more of the trio, but obviously their main storyline is coming to a close.
That's right. I totally agree. All right, everybody, take care. Stay warm. We will see you next time. May the Force be with you.